Welcome back to the Get Off the Treadmill podcast for practice owners and leaders, where we are obsessed with how to build a successful practice and get a life too. Hi, I'm Chuck Blakeman, and we're going to dive into another topic that helps us make more money in less time, get off the treadmill, and rehumanize dentistry by giving everybody their brain back. Today, I'm interviewing John Stamper. He has over 25 years of leadership, business, people development, and entrepreneurial experience. He thrives on coaching people how to build the bridges that will take them from here and now to a successful tomorrow, which is a big piece of our getting off the treadmill. You got to figure out where tomorrow is. Way too much attention on today. So I'm excited to talk to him about that. He's currently the CEO and founder of Digital HCX, which is a software as a service company that provides innovative digital tools and services for healthcare professionals. He's currently running and managing CE Exchange Dental Continuing Education, HCX Media Dental Media, and HCX Tools Dental Practice Tools. There are three divisions of Digital HCX that focus primarily on the dental space, serving the needs of dental professionals. So John, like me, is buried in the dental space. John, it's great to have you with me this morning.
Chuck, thank you so much for having me. True pleasure.
Yeah, you bet. Let's dive into this. So how in the world did you get in? Let's get the overview first. How did you get into this service as a software as a service concept?
Well, I think like all of us, little bits and pieces of what we really gravitate towards, looking back in my life, they happened at different parts. And I was actually just thinking about this the other day, where when I was a kid, whenever the radio would break or something that was technical that would break in the house, I always found that my dad or my mom would come to me. And I always had a passion for wanting to figure that out. And so here we are now, fast forward years later, and have really, really enjoyed diving into, we'll call them digital tools, but most importantly, just living in this digital space of trying to create ways for dental professionals to, I guess in a lot of ways, Chuck, remove those barriers to help them get done what they need to get done. And so I've always enjoyed wanting to be able to solve problems for people. And it just happens to be that we're living at a time where technology is a big piece of that. And so here we are.
And why dentistry?
Well, like a lot of careers we fall into, this one kind of came by accident. I was in the Navy for 8 years and then spent a little bit of time as a financial planner, knocking on people's doors, smiling and asking if they would give me a lot of money, and did that for a couple of years. But had a friend of mine at the time that had just shared with me that there was an opportunity to work for a dental company called Brasser USA, interviewed for the position and loved it from day one, and still here in dentistry.
Very cool. Well, I love the commitment. Well, today you and I agreed we were going to talk about the importance of having a big why. This sounds like woo-woo crap, fuzzy-wuzzy stuff. I don't have time for this nonsense. I'm too busy building great margins in people's mouths and doing dentistry. I've got too much to do in the artistry of dentistry to figure this stuff out. You know dentists, I know dentists. There are some who had this so dialed in, and you can see the impact it has on their practice. And then others who are frantically working from day to day on the treadmill, what we call focused on the tyranny of the urgent rather than the priority of the important, because they haven't understood what the important will do to solve the urgent. And to me, this is the most important thing we do. Our mission statement is to provide tools for business owners to make, or for practice owners to make more money in less time, get off the treadmill, and get back to the passion that brought them into dentistry. But the end of that, comma, we don't even put it on our statement, but comma, so they can build a practice that supports their ideal lifestyle in pursuit of their own big why. It always comes back to why. It's the least asked, most important question in business. Why do we buy this copier? Why are we buying that machine? Why are we hiring this person? Why are we putting in a second practice? And why am I in dentistry? But we don't ask it. Why don't we ask why? Let's just start with that. What is your thinking on why is not a business question?
I think a lot of it, from what I've experienced, Chuck, has to do with just the evolution of how we grow up and the school system that we were in and the different career paths that were available. I'll go back real quick with this story. I worked as a naval recruiter, and I would go around to high schools, and I remember asking a lot of the seniors, I would say, how many of you in this class want to be attorneys or doctors or whatever the case may be, and many of them would raise their hand, and I would say to them, do you know why? Or have you had a chance to go work the midnight shift at the hospital to know what it's going to be like to be a doctor? And to their credit, how in the world would they know that when they were a senior in high school unless they had somebody in their family, what have you? So it just seems to me like as different variables show up in our lives, influences, people we know, families, friends, what have you, we choose these careers in many cases and don't know why. And maybe that's, as time has gone on, why that is, the why is not got asked.
You know, it's the reality. I think the millennials and people who came after that have a little bit of an advantage. I grew up in the shadow of the industrial age, and the why was beat out of us. You don't ask why. In fact, that was, even though you ask yourself what, who, what, when, where, how, and why, these are the reporter's questions. Which one of those is the most human? Well, it's why. You know,
right.
How I'm going to eat the animal and why, or where I'm going to eat it and what I'm going to eat. You know, an animal might ask all those questions, but they're not asking why the way we ask why. And that's one of the most human of questions. That's the one, if any, you're not supposed to ask at work. You're a rebel, you're an outcast, you're a misfit. Don't ask why, because I went to dental school and you didn't. That's why. and you know, we got the why beat out of us growing up. I don't go to work to do any of that stuff. I go to work so I can ask questions somewhere else in my life. And I think we're growing past that. And we're understanding that when you allow and require people to bring the whole messy, creative person to work, you're going to get more done. They're going to be more engaged. Your practice is going to be in better shape. But to your point, the why's been beat out of us. It's just not something we grew up with. The interesting thing is somebody's done some research on this stuff and asked, do millennials actually have a deeper why or a deeper desire to make meaning at work than people like me who are baby boomers? And the answer is no. The difference is that I got it beat out of me as an industrial age. I grew up in the shadow of the industrial age, and they didn't. So they're actually coming into work saying, okay, I don't want a job. A job pays the bills. I want work. Work is meaningful, and it's integrated into the rest of my life. How do I find something like that? We've got to adjust to that reality that the big why is coming back. It was there before the industrial age factory system. We beat it out of us to put us in the factories, and it's gradually working its way back in. So how does this, what else do you see as the importance of this big why? Why is it so important for a practice owner and the leaders and the people in the practice to have a why?
Well, I also think that when you look at where dentistry is today versus maybe where it was 20, 25 years ago, where you drive down the street and you can, based on what city you're in, you could pass 4 dental practices. So whereas before 20, 25 years ago, maybe there was 1. So now it's like anything else where you see all that. If you really want to get into that world, if you really want to be in this space and in working with patients and things like that, a lot of the things I think that did not have to get asked about years ago, because it was like, well, maybe you're at a meeting and you're in high school or in college, and somebody at your friend's party said, you know, we don't have a good dentist around here. What do you think, Jimmy, about becoming a dentist? We need more in this community. And that's where it was. Nowadays, that, as you know, that conversation is totally different, and there are so many everywhere. And maybe that's why, Chuck, in a lot of cases, people are looking inward and saying, okay, if I'm going to get into this, if I'm passionate about it, why am I going to do it? Because it's not going to be easy. It's a lot different than it was 20, 25, 30 years ago. Not to say that it was easy back then, just different challenges today.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's how for those who are our listeners, I'll give my definition of what a big why is, and you can throw your own in there as well. To me, a big why, the biggest of whys, is one you can never check off as complete. That's how I know it's a big why. I can check off, I've got 4 locations, I'm making $1 million a year. I just interviewed a dentist 2 days ago who said his goal was by 35 years old to be making $1 million a year and have a couple $1 million in the bank. And by 34, he had that, and he flatlined. He said he was absolutely depressed because he didn't know why he wanted it.
Right.
And it was fulfilled. He was done. He's done at the age of 34. Now what? Now what do I do? So a why is something you can never check off as complete. I want to be a great father, a great grandfather. I want to have a legacy in the community around me. I want to build a nonprofit that I'll continue to be involved in the rest of my life. There's so many things. Being a great learner, there's so many things that we'll never be able to check off as complete. And those are the things where our experience shows we actually add meaning to the world around us and to our own lives. Those are the things that keep us going because we can never check them off. We're never done. So how do you play into that big why?
Well, first off, I love that. I have never heard it like that. I've never heard it to the degree where it's never over. If it's a big enough why, it's never over. I think because the way that our brains work, our whole lives is everything is to-do lists. And when I graduate high school and when I graduate college and when I get married and when I have kids and when I go to Disney and all that stuff. So I think to really step back and create that is a very poignant point. And quite honestly, I'm going to steal that. I love
awesome.
that.
You know, yeah, keep going.
Yeah. And I think in regards to dentistry, and I will share a brief little story about this, is that I had the opportunity to work with some practices about 4 or 5 years ago where I was working as a coach and consultant and was tasked with helping those practices grow. And when I went in initially and I started to talk about the money and the dollars and the productivity and all of that, there was a couple people that were excited. Most of them weren't. And so I had to go back to the drawing board after having some conversations with some of the hygienists and people in the practice. And they said, you know, John, I did not come into this practice when I'm working in somebody's mouth to worry about the money. Right. And so I really got thinking about it. And I said, okay, the only way that we're going to help these practices move forward and still be productive as businesses is we've got to make a tighter connection. So the whole concept of 100% dental health is what I drew up, which was nothing more than on a whiteboard. I would have 0 on one side and 100 on the other. And I would share with the team, I would say, would you agree that many of you are here to help as many of your patients in this practice go from 0% to 100% dental health? And to your point, Chuck, good luck getting all of them to 100%. So that's a continuous journey, right? Because there's always people falling on that graph. But I found it interesting that when I shared it like that, and they all said, yes, that's really what we want to do. And we all agreed that production and profit was a byproduct of helping those patients get healthy. It totally changed everything. And so it was a story that I always go back to, and hearing you talk about the why, there was a lot of light bulbs that went off when we started to talk about that.
That's great. And this is something that I think can motivate dentists who, many of them, the really great ones, a lot of times are more artists than they are business people. And so it's actually almost, it feels almost distasteful to talk about the money side.
Correct.
Because, you know, we're not, that's not why I'm in dentistry. I'm in dentistry to transform lives. Well, I agree with that. Making money is not an empowering vision. It's one of the tenets of a big why. But the reality of it is, if you want more people to experience your great dentistry, then you have to figure out how to build a business, how to build a practice that will attract more people and give you a wider opportunity to make a bigger impact with your skills. And that, to me, is the motivating piece of this. Money becomes the byproduct of great dentistry, but it also allows you to reach more people. And I say this all the time, and it's in my first book, Making Money is Killing Your Business. Making money is not an empowering vision. People who try to make money tend to make a lot less of it. People who have a much bigger reason to make money tend to make a lot more of it. So it is a byproduct, and there's a lot of research that shows, even with Fortune 500 companies, where they focus on making meaning instead of making money. The 26 out of the 500 Fortune 500s that focus on making meaning make somewhere around, someone modeled this for about 10 years, they grew about 10 times faster than the average Fortune 500. So that big why stuff is incredibly powerful and very much core to getting where we want to go in business. So how do you see that playing out in the way that you help practices? What do you do to help them when they say, well, what's a big why? How do I get a big why? How would you help them with that?
Yeah, I think in many cases it is as big of a question that is never completed, as you said. And in many regards, it's also a very specific question, which means you need to start with something. And I often think about the word yield comes to my mind a lot, which is what you shared. When we get to a point where we are a business that is producing profit, meaning that we have the ability with the patients that we're serving to expand, which so many of them are doing now, which is really exciting, is really get them to think, what are you going to do when you get to this point. So you have that grand why, and at different parts in your career or in your dental practice, how are you going to be able, or most importantly, what are you going to do when you get to this point? I think you mentioned the dentist that got to that certain point and checked off all those boxes.
Yeah.
Had he maybe stepped back and said, there was a part B to that question or to that goal, which is, okay, if I get to 34 and I put all this millions in the bank, then what am I going to do next? And I think answering those types of questions can tend to plot out for a lot of these dental practice owners of where they want to go, and maybe expand beyond their beliefs of where they ever thought they could be. I had the fortunate opportunity to spend time with Dr. Wayne Mortensen and his organization. And it's still fascinating to me I always love to go back to the original story, which is his one practice in Middletown, Kentucky, which is where it all started. And to think that where it was or where it is now, who would have ever thought? I mean, I think he knew that it was probably going to get there. Not too many other people thought that, but
no, even he didn't know.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying, Chuck. It was much bigger than himself, but at each juncture there had to be a question of, when I get to this point, what am I going to do next?
Yeah, and his is a great example of doing it right. You know, we rag on DSOs a lot because, you know, we feel like they're going to hurt dentistry, but that doesn't mean they have to. And I think Dr. Wayne has done it the right way. They bought like 25 practices just last week from someone. But they're doing this with all local dentists. Dentists in each practice own a piece of the practice locally. It's a very localized thing, and they're doing it in a way that rehumanizes dentistry. It's a fascinating approach to dentistry. And I also believe that the statistics show us that the DSOs will never take over dentistry. There will always be room for anybody who wants to have a single location, and they won't have to be threatened by those guys. But we can learn from Dr. Wayne. His top 3 people were at our last Get Off the Treadmill Summit. We do those about once a quarter. If people want to look at those, it's gotsummit.com. But those 3 people came, and they were in the audience. They weren't even part of it. But as we shared what it meant to rehumanize dentistry and to give people their brains back and to chase the big why, the contribution they had was incredible, because Dr. Wayne has thought through this stuff so deeply. And his why is much bigger than, how do I buy practices? There's a why behind all that makes it much more important for him to do that than just accumulating practices. So one of the things we talk about in developing this big why, or one of the things that I experienced when I finally figured out my big why 15 or 20 years ago, the light bulb that went on for me was all these other things you mentioned: building a practice, getting a home, the $1 million in the bank or the $5 million in the bank, excuse me, any of that stuff. What happened to that for me was it now became subjugated to that big why. It became one of those things that I do. We now call those other things that we used to call goals, those are now just milestones or waypoints. They're points along the way. So if that guy who wanted to make $1 million a year and have a few $1 million in the bank by the age of 35, if he had a big why, then that would simply be a waypoint along the way, and he'd be asking himself before he ever got there, why do I want that? So that he knows what to do with it when he got it.
Right.
That was the big downfall, is I got this. Well, now what do I do? I don't even know why I wanted it. Yeah. And that's the biggest piece of this, is how does this fit in? You might find out you need more than $5 million in the bank. You might find out you need less. One of the things that I've studied this a lot, John, and one of the things one of the big lies the industrial age taught us was that if you make a bucket load of money, you will somehow be happy. It'll just happen. You know, it'll just come as a result of that. That's why we have sweepstakes and all these other lotteries and all that kind of stuff, because if you make money, if you have a bunch of money, you'll somehow magically be happy. I've yet to find a single person who said that was true. To the opposite, everybody I talk to says, you know, once you get past $100,000, $125,000, $150,000, money doesn't actually have any correlation to happiness at all. And there's some real science in that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you can't have $500 or $1 million a year coming in, but you need to know why. And then you'll find out why you want to do it. I'd like to solve poverty in Central Africa. I think we can do it in 10 to 15 years, but that's going to take a bucket load of money to do. So I need a lot of money. Right. I need a lot of money. So it really depends on what your why is as to how much money you need.
Yeah.
What would you tell a dentist? How would you encourage them? What would be a first step in them getting a big why?
I think it goes along what you just shared, which is as they're getting ready to get into dentistry. And I've often believed, Chuck, that the more of a vision they have for the future, the less the present hurts, right? So when they're the little things of how am I going to get new patients, and there's a new practice on the corner, and there's all this new equipment, and I've got debt and all these things, I've often believed that when you were talking earlier about as humans, we've been gifted with the ability to think big. I mean, that's really what separates us from everybody. And I think that early on, for them to scratch those big visions on paper, I think it hones a little bit more, like you said, about having milestones versus goals, and maybe realizing that it's going to take a long time to get to where they want to go, and that becomes the first thing. The second thing would be take stock and value in what you're doing on a daily basis when you're building this team and these people around you. I'm sure there are a lot of dentists out there that look back 8, 10, 15, 20 years and you ask them about what they got out of their experience in their dental practice. And I hear so many of them say, I've had this dental assistant for 15 years, or I had this office manager for 8,
Yeah.
and the things we did together and our families and things like that. And I think that's something that when you step into a new practice, you don't know what those relationships are going to yield, because you know if it's going to work out or not. But when they do, as you know, Chuck, that's what people look back at. That's what you're able to draw back a lot of the gratitude from, that you not only you as a dentist, but your whole team, you did amazing things in the community. And those are the day-to-day things that I think when you commit to and you're okay with, can help you on that journey to that bigger why.
Yeah, that's great. I have a couple of clients who have adopted this idea of a big why. Well, a lot of them that have, but these guys in particular decided they were going to handwrite out what their life looked like when it was at their ideal lifestyle. What does it look like? Not when they're 70, because that's the other big lie in the industrial age, is we're supposed to work until we're 65 and then retire and die 3 years later. Retirement is a bankrupt industrial age idea. It was another revelation of this whole idea of a big why. If I get a big why, who says I have to wait until I'm 65 to actually live it out? How about if I get there when I'm 43?
Right.
And then invest the rest of my life in living out my big why, and I never retire. I just change what I'm doing to do the things that I really want to do with my life. So these guys took this to the next level, and they wrote it down. They've learned a lot, and I'm becoming a big fan of this idea of somatic learning. Soma means the body, and learning with the body, not just with the mind. So they physically wrote out what their ideal lifestyle looks like when they got there, as if they were already there. And they did it with emotion. This makes me feel like this. Here's what it looks like. I've got this kind of lifestyle. I have this relationship with my wife and my kids, and I'm contributing this impact to the world around me. That's a big piece of this big why that people don't understand. The dirty little secret here is the happiest people on earth are solving other people's problems.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the reasons that we love dentistry, because we're solving other people's problems. But that's part of the big why, is what part of my ideal lifestyle will be solving other people's problems. If it's just purely narcissistic, it'll be harder for you to want to run toward that. So get that big why and write it down. I'm going to do that now as well. Mine has always been, I typed mine out, but I've seen a lot of research on how somatic learning and getting the body involved helps us crystallize and cement that kind of idea behind us. So that would be something I'd encourage them to do as well. Just write that down, and then maybe take from that, okay, if this is where I want to be 7 years from now when I'm 43, or 10 years from now when I'm 50, what do I need to do this year? And then write that one down. Here's what my lifestyle looks like at the end of this year, both at work and outside of work. That's my lifestyle. What does it look like? Revenue, the whole thing. And write that out, and then figure out what is the next one thing you need to do to get toward that. To me, it's incredibly motivating to know that I no longer have short-term goals that will be depressing once I've gotten to them because they're over. I just have points along the way now. I've got so many things I need to do and check off as complete, because I need to get to that one thing that I'll never complete. My big why is to live well by doing good. And I could unpack that for 2 or 3 Guinnesses with somebody. And if it was any more than that, I'd probably start getting sloppy because I'm a cheap drunk. But we need to have a real clarity on that. I know what that means in fuzzy terms, but I also know what it means every year, that I want this kind of impact with this many people. And we've got some metrics on that we can check off as complete each year. So let's encourage people to do that. Do you have any parting shots or parting words on this idea of the big why, or anything on this concept of thinking bigger about your practice?
Well, I think the one thing that you just mentioned I think is interesting is this whole, you said somatic, is that the
somatic,
yeah. So I literally was having a conversation with a colleague a couple of weeks back, and we were traveling on the road. So when you travel on the road, you can either listen to the radio or you can have a philosophical conversation. So we chose to have a philosophical conversation, but what we were talking about was, I don't know how we got into this, but we said, if I am enjoying a glass of wine and somebody like LeBron James is enjoying a glass of wine, and he's on vacation and I'm on vacation, and all of this money that he's earned and all the wonderful things that he's done, if we could bottle up my experience and how I feel versus his experience and how he feels, how much better does he feel drinking that wine than me? Probably not that much on the human sense. And I only say that because I think it's interesting. You talked about literally writing down and measuring how we'll feel, and probably why, Chuck, a lot of people get to these different benchmarks and don't feel the way that they thought they were going to feel, because it really is not that different. It's what it allows you to do. And I think any parting ideas would be, first off, dentistry is just an amazing industry. It's an amazing profession. I cannot tell you over the years of spending time with dentists and their teams and all that. And it's just been such an enjoying ride. And I think that collectively all together, there's a lot of collaboration that's going on. And at the end of the day, we can do a lot for the patients that need help when everybody puts their minds together and have bigger whys. I think more people need to have bigger whys and get out of the muck. And I think we can make a big difference.
Awesome. Well, let's encourage our listeners to think about this question: why are you in dentistry? And it's not to fix people's teeth. It has to be something bigger than that. That's just one of the things you do to get to that. What does your ideal lifestyle look like? What impact are you having in the world around you? And then how will you get there? Let's chase that rabbit. John, this has been fun. I look forward to talking to you again. Sounds great. Thanks, Chuck. If this podcast was helpful, please subscribe by computer or by phone, or connect with us at www.gottsummit.com, 2 T's, GOTT summit.com. That stands for Get Off the Treadmill. We have those summits quarterly for dental practitioners only. Or connect with us at www.chuckblakeman.com, or email us at grow@cranksetgroup.com. Let's get off that treadmill. Let's get into the participation age. I look forward to seeing you in the next podcast. Thanks.